They say the fiercest Viking warriors were men, forged in fire, born for conquest. But on a frozen dawn in Vinland, it wasn't a man who made the enemy flee. It was a woman, 8 months pregnant, blood-stained and unyielding. She stood where her people had fallen. When her war cry shattered the silence, even death itself seemed to pause. Her enemies dropped their weapons and ran, terrified of something they couldn't name. Her allies whispered she was cursed. Her foes swore she was a demon. But history knew her by one name only: Freydís Eiríksdóttir, daughter of Erik the Red, sister of Leif Erikson, and the most gruesome female Viking to ever walk the earth. Before we go deeper, remember this: there are names history tried to erase, and I'll be the one to bring them back. If stories like this move you, if you want to uncover the monsters, the heroes, and everything in between, like, subscribe, and stay with us. Because this isn't the end of Freydis' story, it's only the beginning of her legend. Before she was feared across the oceans, Freydís Eiríksdóttir was a daughter of exile. Her father, Erik the Red, was a man too violent even for the Vikings, a warrior banished from Norway for murder, then from Iceland for murder again. But exile didn't break him. It forged him. He sailed west across ice and storm and found a land so vast and cold it felt untouched by the gods. He called it Greenland, as if naming it something beautiful could hide the blood beneath the snow. Freydis was born into that frost, a child of rage and winter. While other girls wove cloth and tended fire, she followed her father into storms, watched him sharpen his axe by lamplight, and learned that mercy was weakness. The sagas say she laughed at danger, that she could hurl an axe farther than most men, and that when her brother Leif Erikson prayed to Christ, she stared into the sea and said nothing. Even then, the world called her unwomanly. But Freydis didn't care for the world's rules. She was born of the same blood as killers and conquerors, and in her heart burned the same fury that drove them to claim new lands. Her father conquered Greenland. Her brother discovered Vinland, what we now call North America. And Freydis would soon carve her own place into history, not with discovery, but with destruction. The year was close to 1000 AD, the age when the Norse dared to chase the edge of the world. Beyond the frozen seas of Greenland lay a land whispered about in taverns and sagas, Vinland, a paradise said to overflow with grapes, forests, and fortune. Her brother Leif had already set foot there, but Freydis was not content to live in anyone's shadow, not even her brother's. She gathered men, she gathered ships, and she made a pact with 2 brothers, Helgi and Finnbogi, promising to share whatever wealth they found in the new world. But Freydis was her father's daughter. Her promises came with hidden blades. She quietly loaded 5 extra men onto her ship, breaking the agreement before the voyage even began. It wasn't greed, it was control. In her mind, equality was just another word for weakness. The journey west was brutal. For weeks, their ships groaned through black waves and ice, sails torn by wind that screamed like ghosts of the drowned. Yet, Freydis stood at the prow, her cloak whipping behind her, hand resting on her belly, already heavy with life. The crew whispered that no woman should travel pregnant across the world's edge, but she silenced them with a stare. To question her was to invite something far colder than the sea. When land finally rose through the fog, a coastline wild and green, with rivers glinting like steel under the sun. The men cheered. But Freydis didn't smile. She saw opportunity and threat. Leif's old settlement still stood among the trees, simple houses of timber and turf, quiet, waiting. But when she arrived, she found that Helgi and Finnbogi had reached Vinland first, and they'd claimed her brother's halls as their own. The insult burned through her like frostbite. To them, it was just a misunderstanding. To her, it was blasphemy. She ordered them out, her voice carrying across the camp like thunder, and when they refused, she simply turned away and began building her own longhouse beside theirs. 2 camps, 2 leaders, one silent hatred growing in the wilderness. As winter crept over Vinland, the forest turned quiet. But inside those walls, the air thickened with resentment. Every shared meal felt like a declaration of war waiting for a spark. And Freydis, she was ready to light it. Winter in Vinland was long and merciless. The snow came early, thick and unending, burying every sound but the crack of firewood and the whisper of fear. 2 camps stood in silence, Freydis and her crew in one, the brothers Helgi and Finnbogi in the other. No battles were fought, but every glance across the clearing felt like a challenge. Pride had built a wall higher than any fortress. By the last moon of winter, food was scarce. Suspicion became hunger's shadow. One night, Freydis walked to the brothers' camp, her breath misting in the cold. She told them she wanted peace, that the feud had gone on too long. Her voice was calm, her hands empty. Finnbogi, half asleep, agreed to her terms. They would share their ships and return to Greenland together. But behind her calm eyes, something darker was forming. Not peace, punishment. She returned to her longhouse where her husband Thorvard sat sharpening his knife by the fire. When he asked what had passed between her and the brothers, she told him a lie. She said they had struck her, humiliated her, that they mocked her in front of her men. Then, with cold precision, she whispered, "If you do not avenge me, you are no husband of mine." In the silence that followed, her words twisted through the camp like smoke. The men stirred, uneasy, but Freydis's gaze left no room for doubt. Before dawn, Thorvard gathered his warriors. They crept through the snow toward the brothers' camp, blades drawn, breaths held. Inside the longhouse, Helgi and Finnbogi slept, dreaming of home, of the sea, until the first axe fell. The massacre was swift and merciless. The men of the brothers' camp were dragged from their beds, bound and slaughtered. Those who begged found no mercy. And when it was done, only 5 women remained alive, trembling, unarmed, whispering prayers that no god could hear. Freydis stepped through the doorway, her breath calm, her face lit by torchlight. The men lowered their weapons. Even killers have limits. But she had none. When they refused her order to finish the job, she simply said, "Then give me an axe." The crack of steel echoed through the hall, again and again, until the snow outside turned red. When it was over, she stood alone among the bodies, breathing slowly, like a woman who had given birth to death itself. Then she smiled and said, "No one will speak of this." And no one did. Not until the sagas were written, centuries later. Months passed after the massacre. The men avoided Freydis now, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. They whispered that the blood she spilled had cursed them, that the gods themselves had turned their backs on the camp. Even her husband, the man who once called her his equal, no longer dared speak her name at night. And then came the sound that froze every heart in Vinland. Drums. Faint at first, then thunderous, echoing through the trees. The Skraelings, the native warriors, had returned. Hundreds of them. Their cries rolled like thunder, their weapons gleaming with firelight. The Vikings panicked, shields dropped, axes clattered. Men who had crossed oceans fled into the forest like frightened deer. But one figure did not move. In the middle of the camp, among the flames and falling snow, Freydis stood, heavily pregnant, one hand gripping her belly, the other clutching an axe. She looked at the men running past her, men who once swore to die for glory, and shouted, "Cowards, you flee from shadows, while your children sleep behind you." No one turned back. Then she saw it, a fallen Viking, his sword half buried in the mud. Freydis staggered toward it, the ground slick with blood and ash. She tore open her tunic, baring her chest to the freezing air, not in madness, but in defiance. And she raised the sword high above her heart. The air cracked. The Skraelings stopped. Dozens of eyes stared at her, a blood-covered woman, pregnant, screaming like the earth itself had found a voice. Her cry wasn't human, it was something older, a sound that carried rage, life, death, and the will of every forgotten woman who had ever refused to kneel. The attackers faltered. Then, one by one, they turned and ran. No Viking chased them, no blade followed. They fled from her, from the sound, from the sight, from the thing she had become. When silence returned, Freydis lowered the sword and fell to her knees. The snow beneath her was red. Around her lay the bodies of her people, but none dared approach. They had seen a god in human form, and gods are not to be touched. When the seas finally thawed, the survivors of Vinland packed their ships in silence. The land that had once promised glory now stank of death and fear. Freydis said nothing as they sailed. No prayers, no apologies, no songs. Only the steady crash of waves against the hull and the weight of what she had done. When they reached Greenland, the others stepped ashore like ghosts. Her brother, Leif Erikson, was there to greet them, his face calm, his eyes searching. He asked where the others were. No one answered. Freydis smiled faintly and said, "They chose to stay behind." But secrets, like blood, never stay buried for long. Whispers reached Leif, rumors of slaughter, of deceit, of a woman's wrath that drowned a settlement in blood. He refused to believe them, until he took 3 of her men aside and made them speak. What they told him turned his face pale. His sister, the same girl he had carried on his shoulders as a child, had killed unarmed women, ordered the death of her allies, and watched the snow turn red without blinking. He tortured them for truth, but every scream told the same story. And when it was done, Leif said only this: "I cannot harm her." But her bloodline will never know peace. That was the curse of Freydís Eiríksdóttir. Not death, not exile, oblivion. History would erase her, carve her name from the songs, reduce her to a whisper between sagas. Her father, Erik the Red, would be remembered for founding a colony. Her brother, Leif, for discovering a continent, and Freydis for the sound of her scream. They called her a monster, a witch, a curse, but monsters are remembered. She was not. Her story survived only in fragments, retold by men who could not understand the fire that drove her, a fire that dared to exist in a woman's heart when the world demanded she stay silent. Some say she died alone, wandering the edges of Greenland, her axe buried in the snow beside her. Others say the land itself swallowed her. that her spirit still drifts across the ice, searching for a place where her name isn't feared. But every winter when the wind howls through the ruins of the old settlements, they say you can still hear her scream, not of rage, but of defiance. Because Freydís Eiríksdóttir was never just cruel. She was proof that even in the coldest age of men, a woman could make the world tremble.